Hey everyone, so many things happen in the African Union every day that legit makes me question if Africa is ever going to get out of the poverty and conflict mentality. It seems that there are so many countries with so many domestic problems that rely on creating outside enemies just to justify not having a strong political and economic situation in the respective countries. This has been shown when Morocco's foreign minister Nasser Bourita had an interview with France 24, the French international news channel, to talk mainly about what's been happening in the African Union and to touch on more of the topics of the current relations between Morocco and Algeria. And we'll be going in depth on one of the points that were mentioned in this interview, mainly Israel's potential observer status as a front for a bigger African problem. So please stay tuned and enjoy the video. You know what, I've personally always appreciated the non-aggressive and extremely calm personality of Morocco's foreign minister Nasser Bourita. I think that having a personality like that in such an extremely important political position in the overall Moroccan political spectrum is definitely an asset for Morocco. The first topic touched during the interview is Israel's observer status that has been met with extreme criticism from countries like Algeria and South Africa, and which led the African Union Summit to postpone their decision-making process on granting Israel the observer status. Nasser Bourita commented on the topic and said that essentially Africa and the African Union has changed and that it won't listen the fact that more than 44 countries, African countries, already have diplomatic, economic or military relationships or ties with Israel. Personally, I really don't see why at this point Algeria and South Africa are trying so hard to block something that's bound to happen. And I wouldn't even be surprised if Algeria, given the unusual patterns in their decision making, came to normalize relationship with Israel. This is even after Algeria said back in 2021 that normalization with Israel is an irresponsible decision. Frankly speaking, and this might be seen as a controversial opinion, I don't see the point anymore, to be honest. I don't think that Palestine will have any chance against Israel to do a rollback in history. I think that the most likely scenario that would lead to the least damage for both nations is to coexist and try to move on from this conflict. As for African countries, I think that the best thing they can do right now is try to also move on and build ties with upcoming countries, putting an emphasis on the economic ties that benefit both countries, and that's what Morocco has been doing since the normalization of ties with Israel. I think that overall that's a good decision. Morocco needs to move on from this conflict and care more about its own economic interests. As of right now, there are 55 member states in the African Union. Only 4 of them opposed Israel as an observer, and 44 out of the rest already have ties with Israel in some kind of way. Nasser Bourita went on to criticize the obvious hypocrisy from the country that are trying to block Israel's observer status or situation, hinting at South Africa that received Israel's ambassador in their own country, and he made a very good point actually on this topic. How can South Africa accept having an Israeli ambassador in their own country with the Israeli flag elevated high in the sky and still have contradictory stances when it comes to the African Union? Are these countries only pro-Israel domestically, and as soon as it becomes slightly attached to the African Union, it suddenly becomes a bad thing and they must stop that? At the end of the day, and going back to the title of the first part of the video, Israel's observer status as a front for a bigger African problem. Are African countries really supporting Palestine just to support Palestine, or is it some kind of agenda against this country or that country? What can Africans really benefit from this conflict? How can African countries have a say in other countries when they still have domestic problems? Honestly, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting extremely mixed signals from some countries in the African Union. I think that Israel's observer status isn't really the real problem here. I mean, I could care less if they get the observer status or not. But there are definitely some tensions between some countries, and it's stopping the African Union from serving its main purpose, which is obviously to promote the unity and solidarity of the African countries. And as long as they don't fix those problems, I don't really see the African Union's premise or purpose being accomplished anytime soon. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been That Guy with That Stupid Opinion. This is only my personal viewpoint. Frankly, I think it's a really stupid one. You might agree or disagree, and that's absolutely fine. Please like the video, dislike it if you want, share it with your friends, and I'm out.